earners, but not everyone's happy. Authorities race to investigate how a man in Sydney's east contracted coronavirus. Travel limits scrapped as restrictions ease further across Victoria despite 3 new cases.
What we all know is that Victoria is at its best when we are all together.
And coming up on The Business, crypto craze. What is it, where it's going and what it means for you.
Hello, welcome to ABC News. I'm Karina Carvalho. The Fair Work Commission has increased the minimum wage for Australia's lowest paid workers by 2.5%. Full-time workers will now get $20.33 an hour, or just over $770 a week. It directly affects around 2 million workers, and many more are likely to benefit indirectly.
For more than 70 years, this Melbourne shoe shop has been weathering the ups and downs, like COVID and costs.
Planning is very difficult.
Businesses across Australia will have to find a little bit of extra money.
It doesn't sound much, you say, oh, it's 2.5%. As a percentage, it's a very low sounding percentage.
From next month, the minimum wage will rise from $19.84 to $20.33 an hour. That's now $772.60 per week. 2.2 million Australians will take this home. But millions more people rely on it going up because many industry awards set pay rates based on the minimum wage. Last year, the Fair Work Commission increased the minimum wage by 1.75%. With the economy improving, it's giving our lowest paid workers a 2.5% bump.
The current performance of the economy has exceeded expectations.
There can be no recovery without a wages recovery. When we suppress wages in our country, it hurts the whole economy.
But business has warned of the impact.
This is quite a dangerous decision. It's flirting with people's jobs and it's flirting with people's employment prospects.
We're also in a tight labour market. What does that mean? Well, we stopped importing workers through migration, and now there's not enough to go around. Vacancies are sky high, and that could help shift what's been a stubborn decade of wage growth stagnation, where people's pay packets have barely moved.
The decision applies from July 1st, but won't take effect in some sectors like tourism, fitness and retail for several months.
It doesn't sound much, but you get family businesses, good little coffee lounges, they might well look at their staff and say, well, we can do without these casuals and I'll get family in.
Daniel Ziffer, ABC News, Melbourne.
Farmers desperate for workers to pick their fruit and vegetable crops have been told to expect more foreigners next harvest. The National Party says it has done a deal to establish a new agriculture visa to replace backpackers lost under the free trade agreement with the UK. But as rural reporter Kath Sullivan explains, not everyone is convinced it's a good idea.
Out in Orange, it's usually rich pickings. Only if farmers can guarantee the pickers.
In 35 years that I've been growing apples and cherries, I have never ever been concerned about the harvest time.
But like so many producers this year, Guy Gaeta is worried he won't find enough workers to get the fruit off the trees. And for the first time, he's contemplating the unthinkable.
When you can't pick it, like I said, I hope I don't see it.
The Nationals say they have a solution.
A very good day and a good day to be a National Party member.
A new visa to bring more workers to Aussie farms.
We made a commitment to create an agricultural visa and we've delivered.
The visa would allow citizens from countries including Indonesia, the Philippines and Singapore to work in Australia for up to 3 years.
We are expecting, as part of the agreement with the Prime Minister, to have that up and going by the end of the year.
The visa's been brokered alongside the UK Free Trade Agreement, which scraps the requirement that British backpackers work on farms to extend their stay in Australia.
It will make it easier for British people, for young people to go and work in Australia.
That'll remove about 10,000 workers from a sector that says it's already 26,000 short. The Nationals have seized the opportunity to get something they've long pushed for. The junior coalition partner telling the Prime Minister it wouldn't support the free trade deal unless he supported the visa. The party's celebrating, but the details are sketchy, and there are fears that some Liberals who've long resisted the visa could scuttle it.
I'll believe it when I see it. This has been a promise to us and to agriculture for some time now.
The scepticism's understandable after years of mixed messages.
They've been flip-flopping more than a barramundi on a boat ramp.
Producers just want a solution.
That's the honest thing. We want our produce picked
to ensure their fruit doesn't stay on the vine. Kath Sullivan, ABC News, Canberra.
Sydney is once again on alert after a man in his 60s tested positive to coronavirus. He works as a hire car driver and his jobs include transporting international aircrew. Authorities are now urging people who visited various venues in the eastern suburbs to get tested and isolate.
One of Sydney's busiest shopping centres, Bondi Junction, now again a COVID concern.
It's still a bit nerve-wracking. I mean, you take all your precautions and everything like that, but, you know, everyone gets a bit relaxed when we've had no cases for so long.
A new positive case, a man in his 60s, came here last Friday, Saturday and Sunday. The biggest worry...
May God have mercy on our souls.
An action film screening on Sunday afternoon. The session and other venues of concern now listed on the New South Wales Health website.
Without sort of being on top of things and without being vaccinated, then this is what happens.
The man works as a driver, including for international flight crew.
The other important information, of course, will be what variant this person is infected with. If it's a variant, it can spread very quickly through just kind of casual contact in one of those environments.
Bondi's beachside drive-through testing clinic, far from busy despite the new alerts. Questions will now be asked about whether the man was vaccinated, especially in his line of work, and the broader implications of what a new case with an unknown source means for state borders and the New Zealand travel bubble. Before the positive result, health authorities were already grappling with a COVID scare, investigating whether another returned traveller has caught the virus in hotel quarantine.
At this stage, we still don't know if it happened on the plane, transporting from the plane to the accommodation, at the accommodation, or whether it was just a coincidence that had the same sequencing.
Despite few cases in recent months and vaccination rates slowly rising, it's a reminder the pandemic is far from over. Amy Greenbank, ABC News, Sydney.
And as Amy Greenbank reports, it's unclear whether the new case will trigger new restrictions.
The last time we had a case of community transmission in Sydney was in May, when a man in his 50s who had visited a string of barbecue shops tested positive. At that time around, it prompted the Premier Gladys Berejiklian to make minor changes as she tightened restrictions around how many people you can have in your home and banned dancing at nightclubs. No doubt, New South Wales health authorities will be keeping a close eye on the testing numbers overnight and make that decision shortly.
Amy Greenbank. Victorians can breathe a little easier now as health authorities believe they have the latest outbreak reasonably contained and have moved to slowly wind back restrictions across the state. There were 3 new cases today, bringing the active case number to 55. The rules will ease from midnight tomorrow in Melbourne and regional Victoria. One of the key changes is the end of the 25-kilometre travel limit for Melbourne residents, meaning the divide between country and city Victorians fades a little, but not completely.
For gym owner James Casey, today's announcement means he can begin the long climb back to black.
We can open up again come Friday, which is fantastic. So first of all, we're really happy about that.
But after being shut for 7 months last year, the economic reverberations of this lockdown will be felt for weeks, and the way forward is rocky.
In such a big facility, just having the restriction of the 50 people, it is still crazy.
Holiday hotspots, however, are thankful the barriers stopping Melburnians from travelling will fall.
The state will come back together from 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night.
Woohoo!
We can get our business back open to a small extent. 85% of my customers come out of Melbourne and surrounds.
Melbourne's mask rules will match the region's. House and public gathering caps will be bumped up slightly, while pubs and restaurants across the state will be able to serve more patrons.
The difficulty for us is that we're Melbourne Shire and, we're 100 k's from the CBD where Geelong is 75 and they can have 300, so that makes life really, really difficult.
We want to keep regional Victoria free of this virus.
Alpine resorts overseas have become super spreader hotspots, and to prevent that happening here, Melburnians need to get a negative test before heading to the ski fields.
The industry has to be protected.
If it's a little bit of an inconvenience to get a COVID test, it will be worth it to see our Alpine region able to operate.
The changes are going ahead despite 3 new cases. 2 were close contacts of residents from the South Bank apartment complex. Another is a nurse at the Epping Private Hospital who's been vaccinated. She was caring for elderly patients from the Arcare Maidstone aged care home. It's believed she worked while infectious 2 days ago.
We're obviously very concerned about this new positive case.
Dozens of exposure sites have been added, including the South Melbourne market. Locals have heeded advice to get tested, and nearby facilities were so busy they turned people away.
So now they've got to find another site to go and get tested. So this one's, at 6-hour capacity and closed for the day.
We may yet still have cases in Metro Melbourne and potentially elsewhere who are infectious.
Restrictions should ease again in a week's time if case numbers stay low.
We need our restrictions to be proportionate, targeted, useful.
While today's news is a relief for most, the Chief Health Officer has warned dangers remain. Only 3.5% of Victorians are vaccinated, and winter remains the highest risk time for virus transmission. Bridget Rollison, ABC News, Melbourne.
As Richard Willingham reports, there's no additional financial help for affected businesses yet.
The government says it is reviewing restrictions week by week, and the business is after certainty. There's a little bit of a roadmap if you consider that regional Victoria is, I guess, a step ahead of Melbourne, and they've had further restrictions eased today, and the government hopes that Melbourne can follow that lead next week. But unlike previous easing of restrictions, there's been little fanfare today, particularly in hospitality and those sort of venues. The cap of 75 patrons is probably not enough for many of those venues to say they're profitable, and they're starting to see a drop-off in staff given this uncertainty about the opening and shutting of industry. For the arts and entertainment industry, there's little to sing and dance about, considering there is a cap of just 75 patrons at some theatres, including the Princess Theatre just down the road from me, which has more than 1,000 seats for Harry Potter. Speaking to business leaders this afternoon, the big concern is just a lack of confidence in Victoria, a lack of confidence that there won't be another lockdown if more cases emerge, and they're really urging the government to try and work out a better strategy to manage new cases as they emerge. They do concede that's quite difficult with such low vaccination rates.
So just on that, where is Victoria at with supplies of the Pfizer vaccine?
So Victoria's paused any future bookings of the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine, but everyone's had that first dose will get a second dose. They say it's simply because demand is outstripping supply. Now, the Commonwealth has provided 105,000 doses to Victoria this week. We'll do the same next week and the week after, before dropping down to 83,000 doses of Pfizer. And this afternoon, the acting Premier, James Merlino, took a swipe at the Commonwealth and asked them to stop scolding the states, given the federal government said it would be managing the second doses. Now, the Prime Minister's office says it is there's plenty of Pfizer supply coming, and in July there'll be an extra 200,000 doses of Pfizer made available to Victorian GPs. As for the AstraZeneca, there's plenty available for people over 50 in Victoria to get vaccinated.
3 communities in Melbourne's outer east have been told not to drink the tap water because it may be contaminated after last week's storms. More than 10,000 properties are still without power a week after heavy rains and powerful winds caused widespread damage.
Walking into a new school is never easy, but with the power still out, Mount Dandenong Primary has temporarily relocated to Gladesville Primary School.
And my grade 1 was walking around quite confidently saying, yeah, I'm going to a new school, it's going to be great. And my grade 6 was a bit, I don't know, I'm a bit anxious.
As the kids mingled outside, teachers were ready to deal with those unsettled feelings.
Their plan for the first couple of days is just going to be centred around wellbeing, so allowing students to have a voice to discuss what they've been through.
It's been 7 days of clean-up and more than 10,000 Victorian properties are still without power.
I think the more boots on the ground, the better. It's a huge job, and the SES and the CFA have been incredible, but I just think people are starting to tire.
With trees still falling, military support is being weighed up.
So that's within the scope of what Emergency Management Victoria can ask for, and that assessment's being made as we speak.
Storm damage has also impacted the water supply in Melbourne's outer east.
Residents of Sherbrooke, Callista and the Patch are on a do not drink tap water notice, meaning they have to come to places like this one here to fill up with an emergency water supply.
At the Patch Store Cafe, owner Natalie Collins is making sure people can still get a coffee.
It was a challenge, can I tell you, at 6 o'clock this morning it was like, no, what else can we have thrown at us at the moment?
While Callista local Roy Garbett stocks up.
Oh, just another nuisance. What can I say? It's not Melbourne Water's fault, it's the extreme weather that's caused all this, and we just got to live with it.
This latest nuisance is expected to last for at least 3 days. Talia Olatia, ABC News, Dandenong Ranges.
Victoria Cross recipient Ben Roberts-Smith has told a defamation hearing he ordered prepaid mobile phones to speak to former SAS colleagues because he was worried the media was hacking his calls. He's told a Sydney court he needed to find out who was poisoning the well by leaking information about his missions to Afghanistan.
The images of SAS troops partying in Afghanistan were sent to Ben Roberts-Smith on USBs anonymously in the post. That's according to his evidence today in the federal court, and he didn't know who sent them. A Nine report recently claimed police found them in a backyard search. Today, he denied that he buried them. The USBs were put into a Tupperware container at the top of my desk on the Sunshine Coast, he told the court. Did you bury them in your property? Asked his barrister. No. When you separated from your wife, where were the USBs? Still in my desk, he said. He also revealed he was worried media may have been hacking his phone calls to his former SAS colleagues, and so ordered prepaid phones from his wife's friend who worked at Australia Post. But he said it wasn't because he thought police may have been listening in after they received a domestic violence complaint linked to his ex-girlfriend. Nine newspapers had accused him of punching his girlfriend in the face after an event in 2018. His barrister asked, "Is this true or false that you committed an act of domestic violence against a woman at the Hotel Realm in Canberra?" That is false. In his summary, Ben Roberts-Smith said too much had already been written about him to destroy his reputation, and this defamation hearing was about seeking damages to leave a legacy for his children. He said he feared for their safety after the first stories were written. My family life became untenable, he said. My private business fell over. Nine's cross-examination begins tomorrow. Josh Babbis, ABC News, Sydney.
The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has been broken almost 4 weeks after coming into effect. Both sides launched isolated attacks, but the truce seems to be holding again. The flare-up followed a controversial march by Jewish nationalists through East Jerusalem. Middle East correspondent Tom Joyner reports.
Hundreds of Israeli far-right Jewish nationalists marched from Damascus Gate to the Western Wall, some chanting "Death to Arabs." Plans for a march along this route last month were among the flashpoints which helped trigger 11 days of fighting between Israel and Hamas. That march was rerouted at the last minute, but there were no changes this time around.
We're surrounded by enemies, this is true, but the only way to defeat those enemies is to show strength and strength of conviction, and this is a show of strength.
The flag-waving procession marks Israel's capture of East Jerusalem in 1967. For Palestinians, it's an unwelcome celebration of Israeli occupation of what they view as their capital.
The Israelis are free to do whatever they want. They attack and swear at us, and the police allow them to provoke us.
Ahead of the march, Israeli authorities bolstered security, deploying thousands of police and setting up barricades to keep Palestinians away.
Just in the last few minutes, hundreds of marchers have poured into this area, singing, chanting, waving Israeli flags, openly provocative, just metres away from the entrance to the old city's Muslim quarter. We've seen Israeli police remove at least one Palestinian man. The atmosphere here remains very tense.
We call
the government yesterday to prevent this march in order to prevent escalation and violence. We are not interested in violence.
Those fears were soon realised, with both sides breaching the almost 4-week-old ceasefire. Palestinians in Gaza launched balloons laden with fuel into southern Israel. The Israeli military responded by launching airstrikes against what it claimed were Hamas compounds, an early test for Israel's fragile new government. Tom Joyner, ABC News, Jerusalem.
And ABC correspondent Nick Dole is in Jerusalem, where the situation is calm.
The good news is there have been no further airstrikes from Israel. They did come in a fairly short burst in the early hours of the morning. The Israeli military says that it struck what it calls Hamas military compounds in both Gaza City and in Khan Yunis further south. We don't know a lot of detail about the sort of damage that was caused or whether there were casualties, but Israel says that this was in response to what they call these incendiary balloons. They're basically balloons filled with gas with ignition devices which can start fires in southern Israel, and that is what they did. But Palestinian leaders say that this far-right protest that we saw with demonstrators gathering outside the Damascus Gate, the entrance to the Muslim quarter of the old city, they say that that was a provocation, and Hamas had earlier warned that if the march went ahead, then it would be seen as an escalation, that it could reignite the tensions, and indeed that's exactly what we saw overnight.
So how much pressure does this put on Israel's new government?
Well, this puts the new government under enormous pressure. This new government is only 2 and a bit days old. The new Prime Minister is Naftali Bennett. He's a far-right politician. He's a former Defence Minister who's spoken about his hopes of annexing the West Bank, and he says a Palestinian state shouldn't exist. So everyone will be watching him to see what moves he makes next. Will there be any further airstrikes, for example? But already we are seeing some more moderate members of this government come out, because the government's made up of a diverse coalition. There's far-right, centrist, left-wing and even Arab politicians in this new government. And it is hoped that this so-called unity government can try to bring tensions down a notch. So we've seen some members of the government just in the last few hours condemning the actions of some of the demonstrators we saw in East Jerusalem, saying that anyone yelling death to Arabs is not compatible with Jewish values or Israeli values. But certainly this is a big test for the new government, you know, just 2 and a bit days in, and already the ceasefire has broken.
Nick Dole reporting from Jerusalem. The Prime Minister has described rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific as one of the defining issues of global security and stability. Scott Morrison has met Matthias Cormann in Paris, where the former Finance Minister is now the Secretary-General of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. Mr Morrison has addressed the OECD, saying there are a number of challenges that need to be confronted.
A world that favours freedom, a world where business-led growth is the driving model for economic prosperity, which enables liberty and improvement in social standards around the world. All of this is what the international system, supported by nations like Australia and all of those represented around this room here today, those values that underpin those institutions are so critical, so that we have a world order that favours freedom if we can keep it. And it is for us to do the work to ensure that we do, working together. So, working together on strategic and defence issues is a natural association to that end. Working together in multilateral fora such as this to address very significant issues, obviously in the economy, but broader in other forums, to address COVID, to address climate change, to reinforce our economies, their strength with supply chains, critical supply chains that can be relied upon in good seasons and difficult seasons, and demonstrating in our own economies, in our own regions, and more broadly, the effectiveness of liberal market-based democracies and economies.
The Prime Minister's OECD address was the last official function for the Prime Minister before he returns home. Mr Morrison arrived in France after striking a free trade deal with the UK, and as Europe correspondent Samantha Hawley reports, he also had an audience with the Queen.
Good morning.
Vaccinated Queen is enjoying being out of her COVID bubble.
Very nice to see you. In person this time.
Yes, Your Majesty. It's wonderful to see you.
Come over here and then they want to take a photograph.
That'd be lovely.
Flying high on the back of a royal visit and a free trade deal with the UK, in Paris he met Emmanuel Macron, who offered some of the strongest public backing from a world leader since the souring of relations between Beijing and Canberra.
We firmly reject any coercive economic measures taken against Australia in obvious violation of international law. I know you are on the front lines of tensions that can exist in the region, and I want to say again here how much we stand by your side.
The work that you've done in supporting and standing with Australia, as you've just mentioned, as we go through some difficult times in the Indo-Pacific, and we greatly appreciate that.
Discussed too was the troubled $90 billion French submarine contract, quashing previous doubts Australia would take the deal elsewhere.
We have also continued working on the program for 12 new submarines, which represents a cornerstone of our partnership and of the confidence between our two countries.
And there was time for just a brief meeting with the now head of the OECD, former Finance Minister Matthias Cormann.
The Prime Minister's team will consider his overseas tour a great success, but there are some international thorns that will follow him home, including his refusal to commit to the 2050 target for net zero emissions.
We want to work with Scott, with Australia, on the clean tech solutions, because I think what we both strongly believe is that you can have a green industrial revolution.
For now, they're basking in the glory of a trade deal and the goodies that come with it. Samantha Hawley, ABC News, London.
A Tamil asylum seeker family has been reunited in Perth after years stuck in detention on Christmas Island, with father Nades and daughter Kopika allowed to go to the bedside of the sick 4-year-old Tharnika. The family's long-term future remains unclear, with the federal government attacking what it says has been inaccurate media reporting of the young girl's illness.
All eyes on Nades and Kopika Muruhapan, touching down on the mainland after 2 years in detention on Christmas Island. On the other side of Perth Airport, supporters of the Tamil asylum seeker family rallied. The pair arrived at Perth Children's Hospital to be reunited with the rest of the family, mum Priya and 4-year-old Tarnika.
Everyone was feeling very uplifted that the family were all together again.
Tarnika is still being treated for a condition WA's top health boss described as sepsis.
A lot of the reporting has been inaccurate. So suffice to say
that she doesn't have pneumonia or sepsis.
The illness that the child is suffering and is in hospital for has been well and truly treated.
With the family now settling in for an indefinite stay, support is on the way. One family friend heading west from their former home of Biloela in Queensland.
I spoke to little Kopika this morning and let her know that I was coming, and just her face just lit up. So I just can't wait to have them in my arms and to just be able to sit together.
With health concerns for Tarnika ongoing, the government insists a regional town like Biloela isn't the right place for the family anyway.
There is now a legal process that needs to be respected, and I think that's the law of the land that we all enjoy and should respect.
Not everyone is convinced.
I don't really understand why the Commonwealth is being so difficult and so bloody minded about this.
Doctors here at the Children's Hospital say Tarnika will need at least another 8 weeks of specialist care. Jessica Warriner, ABC News, Perth.
Let's bring you some live pictures now from Geneva in Switzerland, where we think this is the plane that's carrying the Russian President Vladimir Putin ahead of his meeting with the US President Joe Biden. It will be the first time the pair have met since Joe Biden became US President. And the tensions are high between the two countries on a number of issues, from alleged Russian cyber attacks to Russia's role in Ukraine. They also think the jailing of the Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny will feature in the talks today. I mean, before this meeting, Joe Biden had called his counterpart a worthy adversary. He'd also said in previous comments that he'd called Vladimir Putin a killer and said he had no soul, but he's walked some of those comments back now at a NATO meeting on Monday. So it'll be interesting to see how this face-to-face meeting goes. A lot of commentators saying that there won't be anything hugely concrete that comes out of this summit. The talks are taking place in Geneva at the Villa Lagrange, which overlooks Lake Geneva. It was built in the 18th century and it was where the Geneva Convention was decided. So that is the Russian President Vladimir Putin's plane touching down in Geneva. We expect the US President Joe Biden's plane to touch down in about 15 minutes' time. And then both of them, their motorcades, make their way over to Villa Lagrange, where that summit, those talks will take place, and then they will hold separate media conferences after those talks conclude. And we'll keep you across developments over the course of the evening on the ABC News Channel. Time for a look now at what's coming up on the business. Here's host Catherine Robinson.
Tonight, crypto craze. What is it, where's it going and what it means for you? We're joined by an expert panel to discuss the benefits and risks of digital currencies. All this and more at 8:45 Eastern.
Here are the top stories on ABC News. New South Wales authorities are investigating a new local case of coronavirus in Sydney. A man in his 60s from the eastern suburbs works as a driver transporting international flight crew. It's the first locally acquired case recorded in the state since a couple tested positive in early May. Coronavirus restrictions will ease in Victoria from Friday. For Greater Melbourne, the 25-kilometre travel limit will be scrapped and capacity will increase at businesses and hospitality venues. In regional Victoria, density limits will ease further and 5 visitors will be allowed at homes. 3 new locally acquired cases have been detected in the past day. The Fair Work Commission has ruled the minimum wage should increase by 2.5%. The decision will take wages for Australia's lowest paid workers to just over $20 an hour or $772 a week for full-time workers. Labor has welcomed the rise but says many, including gig workers, won't benefit. And less than 4 weeks after it began, the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has ended. Far-right Israeli protesters marched through East Jerusalem before Hamas launched incendiary balloons over the border. Then Israel struck Hamas compounds in Gaza. The skirmish broke the ceasefire, which had come into force after 11 days of fighting. The ABC has announced